and you can report back to us. I don't need a long, expensive memo. I just need something that tells me why it is we're no longer looking at other alternatives. And a couple months later, the memo came out. And by the way, 6 months prior to this, the city had already hired this multinational engineering firm called HDR. And HDR had signed a contract with the city for the first phase of the design project. And attached to an exhibit of that contract, the city and HDR agreed that there was at least a possibility, if HDR stayed in this project, it contemplated that HDR would be making between $13 and $18 million in fees on this project. So when staff decided to take a second look at other alternatives, guess who they hired to perform that analysis?
Oh, the same company.
They hired the same company. The question to that company, I don't know if they did a good job or not. I guess we'll never know. Actually, I think I do know. But there'll be reason to question them even if you agreed with their analysis, because if they concluded that the project they had already been hired for to earn up to $18 million on was not the best financially, then they would lose their job on the project. So that puts them in an awkward position. And that's one more example why I think the city needs to probably spend a little less money on consultants, or at least keep stuff in-house like Jim had suggested, or at least hire local people that are members of the community and have been for a long time. If nothing else, it keeps the $18 million in town instead of putting it in Omaha, Nebraska, where most of these HDR engineers are from, or elsewhere outside the state. And so if you have a local engineering firm, they, I think, view their client as the community because they plan to stay here. They've been here for a long time. Their kids go to school here. Instead of viewing the staff person who hired them, or at least the face of the city, as their client. Engineering firms, these are very smart people. They're very good at what they do, and they're very good at client service. My sister is an engineer and works for a large firm similar to this one. And I talked to her about this, and she says, yeah, if you're not local, you start to view your contact as the client rather than the community. And it's a risk, and it's something that they have to keep abreast of. So that's kind of a bigger picture issue with the city that we need to look at. Let's just show you a chart real quick that looks at what the city is predicting its water needs will be over the next 20 years. Here's where they say we are now, although, as I told you, the peak day in 2011 was only 22 MGD, 21.9 actually. Not up here. For some reason, they drew the line up here. And they're predicting it'll go up. Here they acknowledge that the reliable surface water rights are only going to be 7.4 MGD. So this whole $70 million system we're building, it isn't going to get us any more water on the hottest day of the year than we had in 1956. It isn't an expansion or an improvement in supply. All it is to keep us compliant with EPA guidelines and regulations, which, by the way, do not apply to the groundwater. So if you pump water out of the ground, you're pumping it through a whole bunch of basalt and other underground soils that act as a giant filter. There aren't any of these germs in the groundwater, and LT2 guidelines don't apply to groundwater. So if you look at this, they're going to spend $70 million of your ratepayer dollars on this portion of the water supply, which we already have. And this portion, they're spending a tiny fraction of that because they're already expanding their groundwater capacity. In fact, if you look at these water reports, the way they calculate the water demands, what they say is we have to have sufficient water available to cover the peak day, which is the July 25th hot day, worst Mother Nature can throw at us this year, plus enough to cover the largest single source of water that we have, the largest well, or in this case, the largest single source would be the 7.4 surface water system. So, you know, say it's 25 MGDs, but because I'm going to be conservative instead of using the 22, and you add 7.4 of that, you get 32.4 MGD is what we ought to have available. And guess what? The City of Bend's Water Utility Master Plan confirms that the city already has 33 MGD of well capacity that we've already paid for. And we already have water rights to pump wells up to 44 MGD. So there's no real emergency to build this system right away. Even if LT2 guidelines shut us down tomorrow, we'd flip a switch. We'd pay a little bit more for electricity because we do have to pump the water out of the ground. But if you look at the amount of money you'd spend on electricity, it's a tiny fraction of the interest on the amount we'd be borrowing. So I think Jim said it the best. The first time I heard him talk about this, he said, sure, I think it's a great idea to protect the surface water, but would I think it's a good idea, or would anybody else in this room think it's a good idea if it cost $1 billion? And I think everybody would agree the answer is no. Well, you know, how about $500 million? And, you know, maybe some people would say it's worth doing, but most still would say no. The council needs to figure out what their number is instead of just saying, I don't care what the number is, I don't care what the analysis is, I just like dual source, and I'm willing to pay anything for it. And I think I could probably get into more of this stuff, but I'd rather answer questions. Or Jim, if anybody has questions for him,